The Showrunner is a super old Season 1 legendary SMG that got added back this season and has a one-of-a-kind role that is extremely good. And as of right now, it is the only SMG in the entire game that can drop with Kinetic Tremors, and it also happens to be a 900 RPM SMG, which makes it even better. Kinetic Tremors has been around for a little while now, and I don't know if I'd say it is the best, most meta perk ever, but it definitely has its uses in endgame content and can offer an extremely high damage increase for weapons. The perk Kinetic Tremors works off of a weapon hit counter. Each weapon type with the perk requires a different amount of hits, which if done in a short enough succession will then trigger a high damaging shockwave. In the case of SMGs, this is going to be 14 total weapon hits, and then in the case of things like Sniper, it can get as low as just 3 hits. Then finally, this does also have a 2-second cooldown, where no hits are going to count towards that counter after Kinetic Tremors has been successfully triggered. So in short, you shoot enemies with enough bullets, and you spawn in a high damaging shockwave. Looking at the damage itself, we ended up hitting Carl here for 1,724 damage each and every headshot with Showrunner. And then whenever the Kinetic Tremors are triggered, that then hits for 11,503 damage each and every pulse, which is going to be 34.5 thousand damage in total. The math works out so that for each mag of Showrunner shot, Kinetic Tremors should be proccing at least once to boost your damage up by 54%, which is insane. Naturally, there is going to be some damage fall off, so certain enemy types that end up getting pushed out of the shockwave will eventually be taking less damage, but other enemy types like bosses should remain still and take the full damage. Kinetic Tremors also should be triggering a 54% increase across the board, except when used against minor and elite combatants, which takes 25% less damage, assuming the Tremors are procced against that enemy type. In endgame content, Kinetic Tremors feels amazing. Anything other than the squishiest of red bars is going to be taking enough damage to proc Tremors, which then helps you AoE ad clear and then obviously deal a ton of extra damage. Against anything higher than a red bar, that's going to be a guarantee to proc Tremors, which makes this a great supplemental option against things like champions. Tremors with Radiant make it extremely easy to rip through anti-barrier shields in master content, and in seasons where SMGs have champion mods, this is going to be even better. The only downside to Kinetic Tremors, in my opinion, is when used in super casual content. In a lot of places, you're just not going to be able to trigger the Tremors against red bar enemies because they die too quickly. The upside, however, is that Majors should still be taking enough damage for this to proc, and on something like an SMG that has very high range drop-off, even if you're dealing significantly less damage at a further range, Tremors will be proccing at the enemy's location, dealing full damage. I think it is definitely worth getting overall, especially as a very strong primary to bring into things like GMs to deal with champions and primary damage against bosses. So if you guys are interested in farming a role for yourself, the best thing to do is save up the Season of the Witch engrams. Then at the helm, you could just decrypt these at the ritual table by going into the focusing tab, then choosing the recovered red war weapons, which are going to cost 2 engrams and like 1,000 glimmer each and every time. Then you pray you get a Showrunner. As for the 5 out of 5 God roll, I'm going to be going over exactly what you should be looking for in a second here. But before I do, if you guys do enjoy the video and you haven't already, make sure to drop a quick like and sub down below. We're on the way to 100,000 subscribers. It's completely free and it helps me out a ton. Okay, now we are over in D2 Foundry, obviously going over the Showrunner and its 5 out of 5 God roll. I love this site and I think it's one of the best to use, especially if you're looking at a specific role or what roles you might be interested in for a weapon. It shows all the available perks, and then obviously any perk you hover over or click on, it's going to have all the available information for things like the damage that it deals, how it works mechanically to proc the perk, how things are going to work with like the range of the perk, how it affects your weapon and things like that. We've already covered Kinetic Tremors a lot, so obviously we know that that's going to be the best in column here. I don't think anything else would really be better. Air Assault, Target Lock, Swashbuckler, Fragile Focus. None of these are really going to be better perks to run. So for a final column perk, Kinetic Tremors is your best option. The same exact thing can be said in the third column as well. Overflow, in my opinion, is really the only perk you'd want to run on this gun. It's the only one that's going to really make a PvE role better. Something like Grave Robber could be good if you get melee kills, but it's not really a weapon that's going to fit directly into a melee-based build. And then a lot of the other perks like Rangefinder and Dynamic Sway Reduction are going to be much more of PvP perks to run. Lastly, when it comes to the barrel and then your mag perks, you have a few different options you can select. I always like high cal rounds. This is 5 range, so that's nice. It increases your range, it helps out a bit. But more importantly, in PvE, it's going to really increase the flinch you get, even when under power, against those tier 1 and tier 2 red bar enemy types. So that's really, really good. You could also easily run Rick rounds for range and stability, but I think overall, if you don't go with something like high cal rounds, you should really just be focusing on getting flared magwell, because the 15 reload speed helps this out a ton. As you're going to see, our reload is pretty low, so if you do run something like flared magwell, that 15 reload speed is going to help out a ton. And then very lastly, after that for your barrel, I think Hammerforge rifling is still one of the best options. It's just a free 10 range, especially on an SMG that's going to have some pretty drastic range fall off. I think this is the best option. It's not the most range you can get out of any single barrel, but it's the only one that gives you plus 10 without any major negatives. I think you can get like plus 15 with full bore, but obviously that's going to tank a bit of your stability and handling. So I think Hammerforge rifling is the best bet. And then finally, when it comes to your masterwork, you obviously either want a reload speed or a range masterwork. Handling is already at 60 with this weapon. On M&K especially, stability shouldn't really matter, especially when you're in PvE. Things aren't really hard to hit. So for that reason, I would say my 5 out of 5 god roll is going to be first with high cal rounds for the range, but then more importantly, the flinch and the utility that flinch provides, and then with Hammerforge rifling as well. If we look at the range here, without these, we're at 17-ish meters for our damage fall off to start when ADS'd. And then we add that 15 range. This goes up by 1.3 meters. It's nothing insane, but it should definitely be noticeable for some of those adds that are closer to you when aiming and trying to kill things. And then for that reason, since we're missing out on the reload from flared magwell, that's when I would hope for a reload speed masterwork. Then in the case that you don't get high cal and you do get flared magwell, I don't think you need this much reload speed, so I would hope for a range masterwork so that you have a nice balance between your range and your reload. This will be a further range that you get when ADSing, plus you're going to have higher reload anyways, so this is a much better stat distribution for the weapon, but obviously you're missing out on high cal rounds and the flinch that provides, especially when under power. So those are the 2 rolls that I would be aiming for. And then obviously, if you happen to get like a 4 out of 5, as long as it's not something that like tanks a ton of your stats or something that's noticeable, it should be good. That is basically it for the video. If you guys have been using Showrunner at all this season, let me know in the comments down below where you think it ranks compared to other SMGs in the game. The only other thing I didn't really discuss is that I could easily see the perk getting a lot better as well with a buff or 2. The hit count could easily go down to something like 10 shots instead of the 14 that are currently required. And these hits also only work when used against a single enemy. So you can't shoot like 7 into one enemy, then 7 into another, and proc Kinetic Tremors. So if this ever got changed to like a universal counter rather than at the individual enemy level, it could make the perk way more useful. Before I end the video, my team is also currently running speedruns for Garden of Salvation. We even use Kinetic Tremors in our run, so if you guys are ever interested, a link to my Twitch will be in the description down below. As always, have a good one, guys. Peace.